Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another tops and flops video. For those of you who might not be familiar with this series, at the end of each month or the beginning of the next month, like this time, I make a video in which I look back at my reading of that previous month and then I pick a couple of tops and a couple of flops. And my first pick is the best reread of the month. As you know, if you're following me, I'm never good with rereads, even though I want to, but then, I don't. And so for 2019, one of my goals is to really reread more books. And so far it's going okay. And anyway, I could pick the best reread for April, and that was the Odyssey, newly translated in 2017 by Emily Wilson. This was a buddy read for me with Lukáš over at Totally Pretentious, and if you don't know his channel, I will leave a link down below, and you should definitely check him out, especially if you're interested in classics, Greek, Roman, because he reads a lot of classics, and he's really enthusiastic, and I love his videos. But anyway, check him out. So we reread this together, and I read the Odyssey for the first time in my high school years in a German translation, and I thought it was horribly boring. I reread it then in an English translation not so long ago, twice actually, and I picked the André de Rieu translation, which is a prose translation, so not in verse. Emily Wilson's translation is, if you can see that, in verse. I will leave a link, by the way, to a lecture she gave quite recently in which she talks about her approach to the translation. So if you're considering reading this one, you might want to check out her lecture. But anyway, so her translation is in verse, and not in free verse, but really in verse. So it has quite a steady rhythm. She did that because the Greek original also has this steady rhythm. Another major basis for her approach is how she looked at the language. And she said also in the talk down below that a lot of the English translations have this tendency to be rather pompous. So in order to render the heroic poem, many translators obviously think that this means they have to use pompous language. She also translated, Wilson's translation, let me say this first, is not pompous at all. It's quite lean. It's the language is rather everyday language, and for her that was the language also of the original. Another thing that she did that is obviously quite different from other verse translations is that she kept the same number of lines as the original, which meant also that she had to make choices. For instance, if you have a certain Greek word and you think as a translator, well, that can mean A, but it can also mean maybe a little B. Many translators then use both words in the English translation, which makes the translation much longer and also a bit stuffy. Well, like I said, this is lean and not stuffy at all. I definitely enjoyed it. I also enjoyed her approach to the characters, how she tried to give different characters their voices, their point of views. So if you are interested in reading the Odyssey for the first time maybe, or even as a reread, I can certainly recommend Emily Wilson's translation. Oh, and by the way, she is an Oxford scholar. She's a British classicist and scholar. And she has translated other classical authors before, Seneca, but also Euripides. And she might even translate the Iliad in the future. The next book I want to talk to you about is my biggest surprise. And that one is Jane Rawson from the Wreck, published in 2017. Now, surprise, because there are a couple of things with this book that when you had told me, I would have said, well, that's probably not for me. There's a lot of magical realism in the book. It's about a shipwreck. I'm not that interested in stories like that. It has this sort of dreamlike feel to it. A lot of people said on Good Read. That's a lot of these criteria. Normally, it's just not for me, but I love the book. Jane Rawson is an Australian author whom I've never read before, and I picked up this book because of Aussie April, the read-along that was hosted by Jacqueline from 6 Minutes for Me and Doris from All the Books to read more Australian authors. And I read this as a buddy read with an Australian booktuber, Jacqueline. From 6 Minutes for Me. Jacqueline didn't love the book as much as I did. In our buddy read, we had the discussions that for her the story never came together quite as much. But anyway, I really love this book. So it's set in the 1850s, it starts 1859 with a shipwreck that actually happened off the coast of Australia, and one of the survivors, George Hills, is actually the great grandfather of the author, and he did survive the shipwreck. So it's the story of his life after, just when the book opens with the shipwreck, and then his life after, and you follow him not only deeply traumatized, I think, what we now would call PTSD, after having survived 8 days before he was rescued without food and water. But also the twist in the story is that there is a creature from another planet, from another dimension, who is sort of came to Earth by accident, more or less, who attached themselves to George, helped him survive, but then also attached himself to George's life. So this creature will play a role in George's later life. We see George then married to his fiancée he had before the wreck, Eliza. They have 3 children, Henry, the oldest boy, and then Georgie, and the younger boy, Hills. There's also some family dynamics. George's brother-in-law and his wife, they discuss, Darwinism. So it's a lot in there in the book. And I think, excuse me, for Jacqueline, and I can understand that there were maybe too many side plots, especially one character, female character, that plays a role in the main plot, but is also explored, has her own plot line. And I agreed that this was maybe not necessary. But for me, I especially loved the creature. We get the point of view of this creature. We get a little bit of the background, where it came from, the planet that was invaded, and they had to flee. And I thought that was just brilliant. The way an alien looks for a new home and tries to literally attach himself to a human. I thought that was brilliant. The story was heartbreaking at times as well, and I thought the writing was gorgeous. So from my point of view, I can highly recommend it. But maybe check out Jacqueline's review if you have doubts. And my third pick for the tops is the book that I thought about the most, and that is Pat Barker's book, The Silence of the Girls, published in 2018 and now shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. This was also a buddy read with Doris from All the Books. I'll leave a link to her channel down below, of course. If you aren't subscribed to her, you must. I knew Pat Barker from her Regeneration trilogy, books about World War I, and I thought those books were brilliant. So I was really curious what she would make with the Iliad, because The Silence of the Girls is a retelling of parts of the Iliad from the perspective of Briseis, who was the daughter of a king in one of the cities that have been sacked during the Trojan War, and she was captured and enslaved and given as a trophy to Achilles. So the book is opening from her perspective. We learn a little bit about her childhood, but then mainly her life as a slave with Achilles. But the book is also told partly from the perspective of Achilles. And the central theme is the big conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon during the Trojan War after 7 or 8 years, when Achilles decides to stop fighting. And mind you, Achilles is the best fighter the Greeks have, so without him they will lose. That's a given. Now Achilles left the fight because Briseis was taken from him and given to Agamemnon, because Agamemnon has to give his prize, another young woman, back, because she was a priestess for Apollo, and that didn't go well with the gods, that Agamemnon took a priestess as a slave. So Agamemnon demands Briseis, and plot ensues after that. If you're familiar with the Iliad, you know that. So a lot of it is not told from Briseis' perspective, but we learn about this conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles from Achilles' point of view. We also get Agamemnon's point of view. There is the relationship between Achilles and his best friend / lover Patroclus, which is also explored. And of course, the story then ends when the Trojan War ends and the Greeks win. Now, the criticism from a lot of people that I've seen on YouTube, but also on Goodreads, is that the book was promoted and marketed as a book about the Trojan War from the female perspective. Well, that's not entirely true, as I told you. What it does is it does include the female perspective and the female experience, especially those enslaved, into the narrative. And I thought it was really brilliantly done. I thought about that book a lot because I think that Pat Barker is somebody who can really capture the horrors of war, because even a mythological war is just gruesome. And she does a brilliant job with that. She also does a brilliant job with completely humanizing the heroes, quote unquote, that we know, Odysseus, Achilles, Agamemnon, Patroclus, Ajax, all these Greek heroes, and she makes them very human by using modern language and quite brass at times. I mean, there is Odysseus saying "fuck you" or "asshole," which is a choice to do that, but I think what it really achieved is that you saw them, at least I experienced them as humans, and not as mythological hero figures. And I thought it was great. I really loved the book. I thought it was a fantastic retelling, but it's not a book solely about the female perspective, and it can't be, because if you take Briseis, her faith is intertwined with this conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles. So you can't leave that out. And I thought I understood the choices that Pat Barker made, and I thought those were the right choices. And from my point of view, I can certainly recommend the book. Those were the tops. On to the flops. I had a really good reading month in April, so there weren't any books that really annoyed me, like back in March, but there were 2 disappointments. And the first one was Helen Wecker's fantasy novel, The Golem and the Jinni, first published in 2013. I read this together with Chris from Chris Bookish Cauldron. I'll leave a link to his channel down below. Please go check it out if you haven't subscribed yet. And I want to read more fantasy. And Chris suggested this book as a buddy read. It was published in 2013 and got rave reviews. But for me, it was a meh read. Not a horrible book. It was easy. I could breeze through it. It was fast paced, not badly written, but yeah, meh. It's the story about a Jewish mythological figure, a golem, so a person made of clay and then um, given life, and a Jinni, which is an Arab mythological figure, a spirit, and this particular Jinni was trapped in human in a copper flask and then released, but still trapped to its human form. Though these two figures meet in early 20th century New York. The book opens in 1899. The golem, Chava, a girl, and the Jinni, Ahmad, a man, they meet. Plot ensues. They have to fight an evil sorcerer. You know, your typical stuff. And that was all fine. But the whole idea of this immigrant society was a bit cardboard, you know, like society, an immigrant community that sticks together and helps each other. And the two main characters, although the premise I thought was really interesting, yeah, they were not really well developed, I would say. They had certain one or two defining characteristics, and that was it. So yeah, it's like I said, it's not a bad book. It's an easy read, but it was quite meh. And the last book I want to talk to you about was The Real Disappointment of the Month. Not only a meh book, but a real disappointment, and that is Sarah Moss' new novel, The Ghost Wall, published in 2018. Longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction this year, didn't make the shortlist, in my opinion, rightfully so, shouldn't have made the long list in the first place, I think. But I'm in the minority here, together with Sean, who made a wonderful hot take video. I will leave a link to it down below. But most people love this book. And I thought it's quite a small book, 200 and something pages, and the first half or the first third was brilliant. We have our main character, Sylvie, a 17-year-old girl who, together with her father, a bus driver, and her mother, she works, I think, as a cashier in a supermarket. They join a group of students and a professor to enact early Britain's life. So, you know, you don't have suppliance or running water, and you just live in the wild and try to see how those people lived. So it's an anthropological research project. And the atmosphere in those woods, and Sylvie is quite a feisty character with an abusive father and a mother who doesn't know how to handle that. Brilliant. The writing was gorgeous, the atmosphere was fantastic, and I thought Sylvie as a main character was just brilliant. And then it all fell apart. It's like one of those books when you read on, you think, no, please don't do that. Please don't go down that road. And then she does, the author, that is. So it's without giving you any spoilers, but it's a Lord of the Flies theme, you know, everything going horribly wrong, which didn't make sense to me at all from the characters, why it would happen, the motivation of the characters, and why this Lord of the Flies thing could actually happen. The ending felt to me as if the author thought, well, I have to stop now. I have to end it, so I might as well stop here. Yeah, it was, like I said, a huge disappointment. It's this idea that you have this wonderful setting with this perfect main character, but in my point of view, the author just couldn't tell a good story. So, huge disappointment. Minority. Anyway, those were my tops and flops for April. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Talk to me down in the comments as always, and I'll see you all soon in the next one. Bye-bye.